Hello, hello, peeps. Here we are again. Thanks for tuning in. It's the Switch4Good podcast, and I am Dotsie Bausch, and I'm here with my co-host, Alexandra Paul. You hanging in there, chick?
Oh, yeah. With you, we're a team.
It's true.
Okay, we're stronger together.
Well, today we are going to talk about one of your favorite subjects, gut health, restoring your health, right? Optimizing your microbiome. We have the man, the myth, the legend here with us today, and I'm going to reveal that in a moment. But it's time to stop villainizing your food and start enjoying it again, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Two of the biggest trends of 2020 finally converge in a brand new book that releases today called Fiber Fueled: Plant-Based Nutrition and Gut Health. So studies show that human health starts in the gut. It is the key to boosting our metabolism, balancing our hormones, optimizing our brain function, and taming the inflammation that causes a host of diseases. Our most popular diets, like the keto and the paleo diet, teach elimination as the path to better gut health. Although well-intentioned, they ignore the latest research and as a result are far more dangerous than most realize. Their restrictive nature is hazardous to our gut microbes, sacrificing healthy bacteria and in the process jeopardizing our overall health. In this brand new book, Fiber Fueled, by leading gastroenterologist, and here's the big reveal, our guest today, Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, who's going to go by Dr. B, because I can barely pronounce it. I think I nailed that just then, I might say. The solution is not deprivation. It's actually the opposite, radical abundance. The scientifically proven way to fuel our guts for optimal health is with dietary fiber, you guessed it, from a diverse mix of plants. So let's get down to it, Dr. B. We are so stoked to have you, and congratulations. This is your first book, right? And this is the biggest thing that you've ever done in your life, like you mentioned to us before the show. So wow, congrats.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I would be remiss to say that this is the biggest thing I've done in my entire life, because I do have my wife at home. I got my two kids, and clearly that is the best. But from a, if we want to call it an academic perspective or, professional perspective, this is the biggest thing that I've ever done. And it feels really good. I'm so happy to be here with you guys. Thank you.
So talking about accomplishments, you went to med school at Georgetown, then you specialized in gastroenterology at UNC hospitals. You already were accomplished in your early 20s. Where were you headed back then, and what was your health philosophy? Because from what we know about you and how you introduce in the introduction of your book, you started off very differently from the healthy, fit guy that you are today.
There's a disconnect between Western healthcare and nutrition, and it's problematic for the patients. And it also is problematic for me and the doctors. And part of the reason why is because we're not given the education that we need to be able to take care of our patients from a nutritional perspective. And that includes even myself. So I'm a human being. I fell for the same problems, the same traps that other people do. And so I was eating a diet that was predominantly junk food, lots of hot dogs, Philly cheesesteaks. My favorite was a ribeye with a glass of red wine. I'll keep the glass of red wine these days. I have not had a ribeye in years, and honestly, I don't miss it. I honestly don't miss it, and which is a crazy thing to say, because back then I would have never guessed that. But my health got away from me. Here I am, and I'm 30 years old. I should be in the prime of my life. I've gained 50 pounds compared to who I was in high school. That's a hard pill to swallow for a guy who was a great athlete. I gained 50 pounds, anxiety, high blood pressure, and frankly, needing to keep myself on caffeine all day long just to get through the day. So yes, I'm achieving, my professional goals back then, but I don't like the way I feel. I don't like the way I look, and I don't know what to do about it. And it was discovering the power of a plant-based diet that radically transformed my life, sent me on this path. It was not an overnight thing. I didn't switch in one day. This happened over the course of years. I was pescatarian for several years, and still including the dairy, still including the eggs. And one day I said, you know what? I'm just going to see what happens. And I went for it, and I lost 15 pounds almost immediately. And I was back to my weight from high school. And so to me, this was incredible. And, let me just say that I've brought these practices into my clinic, and thousands of patients have benefited from this, to the point that like people may not look at me right now and think, oh, this guy hates social media. I really don't love social media. I honestly don't. I never had any interest in it, but I had to share this message. I had to. And so in 2016, I started my Instagram account just to spread this message of what was happening in my clinic. Let other people know that this is the way that it works. This is what the science is saying. And now here we are, and the book is coming out, and I'm thrilled.
And your Instagram account is booming. You have a lot of followers. What happened? What you were 50 pounds overweight, working in the medical field, eating junk diet, typical bachelor guy. How did you change? Why did you even consider giving up meat and changing your diet?
All right, so let's go back to around 2012. And I'm in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I'm in my GI fellowship, and I am single. And you can imagine, as a 32-year-old single guy, I am on a mission to get myself in the best shape physically possible. I want to attract someone, attractive. And so I'm a very goal-oriented person. So I'm not exaggerating, and you guys have done even more than this than me, but I was in the gym 30 to 45 minutes on the heavy weights, and then either jumping on the treadmill for 5 to 10K or jumping in the pool for 100 laps. And I was doing that 6 days a week, and I'm not exaggerating. And I could put on muscle. I could not lose weight. And so I'm just like, what the heck is going on here? What's with the puffiness? And I met the person who now is my wife. And I had never been around someone like this before. We would go out to the best restaurants, and you could get whatever you want. And she would ask them to just make a plate full of plants. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? Like, you could get a pork chop, you could get a ribeye. What are you doing? And I would see her do this. And my wife, she could eat without restriction. Like, she was not cutting meals, cutting calories. She was doing none of that. And she looked absolutely incredible. And so it opened my eyes, like, how is she able to eat whatever she wants and maintain her body and the level of fitness when I'm over here working out like a madman? And it just led me down this path where I said, you know what, I'm just going to try this. I'm just going to try something. And so I started with a simple thing, a smoothie for dinner. That was it. Instead of stopping for fast food, I went home, bananas, berries, some greens, maybe some flax and chia. And that's what I did for dinner. And I felt instantly so much better. And then I noticed that my body was starting to change. And I kept running with it. And I went down that path. And along the way, you have to understand, I'm a doctor. I got a master's degree in clinical research from Northwestern. I didn't just do a gastroenterology fellowship at UNC. I did an epidemiology fellowship at UNC at the School of Public Health that's there, which is ranked number 2, tied with Harvard.
So you're a researcher is what you're saying.
I'm a science guy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a science guy. And so the science has to be there. I won't take it if the science is not there. I'm just not going to. And so as I started to explore this, I asked the question, why have I not been taught this in my medical training? And I went to the literature, and I didn't find a couple of dingy studies. I found thousands of high quality research studies that already exist that show the path to better health is already decided. It's already clear. The debate is manufactured. It's plants.
What was the research you came up? Was it Ornish's initial research that you stumbled upon, or what were the couple of those studies that you were just like, wow, this is a game changer?
Well, so let me put it this way. I started with books. Mm-hmm. And there were, I love Ornish's studies. You go back to his heart studies from the 90s, and they're just like mind blowing and amazing. And he just keeps sort of leveling up with doing that stuff. But to me, I read a couple of Joel Fuhrman books, and that to me was a really powerful thing. And learning about sort of the nutritarian concepts.
What are those? What does that mean, nutritarian?
So
concept?
Maximizing nutritional density in your diet, recognizing that everything comes with a cost. The cost is the calorie. So get as many nutrients per calorie as possible. I was eating the opposite of this. I was going low nutrient, high calorie. And this helped me to open my mind to the idea of going high nutrient, low calorie, which is plants. And so I started I read Fuhrman's book, and then I started to look at the science in my field, gastroenterology. And there were studies that were coming out, and I'm happy to tell you about the one that really changed the game for me, which was 2014, January of 2014.
Please.
And it's a study published in literally the #1 medical journal in the world. Okay, if we find the cure for cancer tomorrow, this is the journal that it's going into. It's in Nature. The lead author was Lawrence David. And Peter Turnbull, who's one of the other world's leading microbiome researchers, was on this study. So January 2014. And here's what they did. They took a group of people and they wanted to see, this was not like meant to be any dietary preference. This was asking the question, can you change a human being's microbiome with diet? Now, what they had shown in animal model studies a bazillion times that this was possible. But we're more complicated, so you have to show it in humans. So what they did is they took the complete polar opposite extreme diets, and they put the same people on those two diets, and they monitored their microbiome day by day. So what did they do? 100% whole foods, plant-based diet, and they compared that to 100% meat, eggs, and dairy. And here's what happened.
And those people were not eating any fiber because they were literally only eating meat, eggs, and dairy, not with like a side of broccoli, just animal foods.
You could call it a carnivore diet.
Okay.
This was before the carnivore diet existed.
Right.
You could call it a keto diet in a lot of ways because the fat profile fits. It's ultra low carb. But no, they were not consuming any fiber. It was 100% animal products. All right. And these people agreed to do this study. And they went on 5 days of each one of these diets. And then there was a break in between to wash out and allow it to return to normal. So here's what happens. Day 1, the microbiome changes.
In each cohort.
Yes. Day 1, the microbiome changes. What that means is that our diet forms our microbiome. That the food that you eat today is already having an effect on your microbiome. And we can break down why that is in more detail if you want to. But
well, first, I'd like to make sure that our audience understands what the microbiome is after you explain this study.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. And so day 1, the microbiome changes. And each day you see further drifting towards a certain specific pattern associated with these diets. So what do you see in the person who eats the 100% whole foods plant-based diet? You see the emergence of what are universally described as microbiome scientists as anti-inflammatory microbes. They have a unique power, which is that they release something called short-chain fatty acids. We'll talk more about those, but suffice it to say, these are anti-inflammatory molecules that are like scrubbing your body clean throughout the entire body, all the way to your brain. Okay, so you see this pattern in the diet that's on the completely plant-based diet. Flip side, you go on the completely animal product diet. Okay, in just 5 days, disturbing changes. You see the emergence of what are described as bile-tolerant microbes. One in particular, Bilophila wadsworthia, has been strongly associated with the development of inflammatory bowel disease. What does that mean? In 5 days, you haven't just changed your microbiome. You have laid the foundation for inflammatory bowel. It's not going to happen in 5 days, but you're setting yourself up for this to happen. The other things that they saw are that there was actually, believe it or not, in the animal product diet, there was resistance, antibiotic resistance of the microbiome. Why would that be? Why would you have antibiotic resistance by just eating food? Because we know that antibiotics are given to those animals. And so that diet is having a negative effect on your ability to fight off an infection because it's breeding antibiotic resistance. So what we see in just 5 days of this diet are radical changes based upon your choice, one side or the other. One is completely universally accepted as good, and the other is universally accepted as bad. And to me, when I saw that, I was like, it's all making sense because it all starts in the gut.
So tell us the gut, because we had Dr. Angie Sadeghi on, and I think she's also a gastroenterologist and said it's everything from the mouth to the anus that you deal with that whole structure. Is that correct as a gastroenterologist?
So when we talk about the gut, if we want to use the term loosely, 100%, Angie, who's my friend, is exactly right that it's basically from the lips all the way down to the bottom. Okay, so that's our gut. When we're having conversations about the microbiome, let's define that a little bit. Microbe means this invisible living creature, as alive as you and I are. We just can't see it, so it's hard for us to pretend or acknowledge that it exists. But it has a life too, and it has things that it does. It's not just there existing, it's manipulating its environment. All right, and we have these microbes on all external facing surfaces throughout our entire body, from the top of our head to the tippy tip of our toes. But they're concentrated in the gut. I just said external surfaces. Your gut is actually an external facing surface. Think about that. Mm-hmm. So the deepest part of your body is where we interface with the outside world. And this is where we find the highest concentration of these microbes. There are 5 different types of microbes that can exist in this location. The main one that you need to know is bacteria.
Well, so when you say in this location, is it the intestine, the colon, the stomach?
It's the colon.
The colon.
It's the colon specifically. So the stomach and the small intestine have very small amounts.
Okay. And the large intestine and the colon, so it's mostly the colon, which is what, a foot?
No, so the colon and the large intestine those are synonyms from our perspective, so it's the same thing.
Okay.
And yeah, so you could use those words interchangeably. The colon is a little bit like an accordion. So it typically will say it's about 5 feet long, but you could stretch it out further if you were to fill it up with air or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
So yeah, and so the microbiome predominantly exists there. Now, you have it in your skin. It's inside of a woman's vagina. It's inside of your mouth. This is the main location, though. And the microbiome is mostly bacteria. Now, we have been taught that bacteria are bad, that we need to fear them. And so there's been this war that we've waged throughout the entire 20th century, entering into the 21st century on these microbes. And what is that doing for us? Actually, what it's doing for us is giving us many of the conditions that we're dealing with here in the 21st century, like autoimmune disease or obesity, type 2 diabetes. Our diet feeds into that too. Don't get me wrong. It's not just the microbes by themselves, but it's part of the package.
But the microbes occur because of our diet. They live, the kind of microbes we have in our intestine and colon exist because of what we feed them, right?
So there's a level of complexity where you can't isolate it to just one thing. But the number one thing that feeds into this is your diet. You're exactly correct. The number one thing is your diet. There's other factors too. There's genetics, there's your lifestyle, so exercise, sleep. There's many different types of studies that have looked at how we can affect our microbiome beyond just diet without having to lift a fork. But by far, the most powerful thing is your diet. And the reality is you can't have a bad diet and expect to have a healthy microbiome. It's not going to work.
Right. When you see patients, I'm assuming so many of them come in, almost maybe all of them with some kind of gut distress, whether that's bloating or constipation or diarrhea or just, abdominal cramping. What are some of those first steps that you take to determine first a diagnosis, like what's going on, and then potentially what might be that healing plan? And you can take that in two parts because I realize it's two questions.
Yeah. Well, so, let me just say that it's a little bit tough to like completely define everything that I do because it's so individualized, right? And I take care of so many, like I'm the expert for the esophagus, stomach, small intestine, colon, the liver, the pancreas, right? So all these different organs and all the conditions that can be associated with them. But let me just say that the most powerful tests that I have are upper endoscopy, colonoscopy, and CAT scan. All right. But even more important than that is a good history. You just have to start by listening to your patient. Let them explain what they're experiencing. And most of the time I can narrow it down quite a bit just based upon good back and forth and answering those questions. I take care of people with digestive issues. Virtually 100% of people that have digestive issues also have damage to their gut microbiome. I'm moving them towards a plant-based diet, ideally 100%. But beyond that, the other thing that I find to be extremely helpful, and it's shocking what low-hanging fruit this is and how much it can help, is a simple prebiotic fiber supplement. So it's a specific supplement that is feeding and nourishing the healthy microbes that live inside of us. That's what a prebiotic is. Most people have heard of probiotics, which are like the living organisms in a pill.
Mm-hmm.
This is different. This is actually the food for the microbes, whether it's the microbes that live inside of you or the microbes that you would take in that pill.
But why can't I just do it with food? Why can't I eat maybe more sauerkraut, more fresh greens, and take care of it with food? Can I?
So many people can get, let me put it this way. If you have a C- microbiome and you want to take a probiotic, I don't think that you're going to do better than getting your microbiome to a C.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a C- microbiome and you take a prebiotic, I think you can move it to a C+. If you want an A- microbiome, you have to be willing to step up and make these changes. You have to be willing to make these changes.
You mean make the food changes, actually? Is that what you're saying? Yeah,
yes.
Actually eat and so
you can change it with food. You're just saying if somebody is at a C-, you want to help them with the prebiotic supplement plus food. But if they're at, I don't know, my stomach feels great, so let's say it's an A-, can I get it to an A+ with just food?
I think that you probably could. So to be honest with you, to answer your question, let me first say this. There is a hierarchy to this. Okay. And that's, I guess, to be clear, that's what I'm trying to say is that above all else, diet matters the most by far. 3 pounds of food per day. There is no supplement that is going to radically change what is the constitution of the 3 pounds of food per day that you eat. But after diet, number 2 is prebiotic supplements. And despite all the hype surrounding probiotics, I put them at the bottom. They're number 3. Now, is there value to like a prebiotic supplement if you eat a completely plant-based diet? Yeah, I do. I actually take it myself. And you know what? I'm 100% whole food plant-based. I follow all the principles. Like I practice what I preach. And I notice a difference when I'm not taking it. And so I choose to take it and I love it. And I am at a place now where I'm 40 and I have no health issues and I want to keep it that way.
When you say I notice a difference, what do you notice? When you're not
Well, it's really predominantly, not to be too graphic, but I literally talk about this all day. It's in my bowel movements.
Yeah. We like to talk
It's in my
about
bowel
poop
movements.
as vegans in general. So we're cool.
Yeah, I think it's important. Do you recommend, like a lot of people are constipated, we don't eat enough fiber, and you talk about that in your book a lot. I think you say that Americans on average eat 15 grams of fiber, whereas indigenous peoples in Africa or in South America will, if they are eating whole foods, they will eat 100 grams of fiber. Tell us about fiber. What does that mean? People don't really know. They think of Metamucil.
Yeah, good point.
Which is not the one you recommend.
No, not at all. Yeah, and so fiber. I think we need to start over. a little bit and, erase the image of your grandma stirring up that orange drink so that she could poop. And let's take it from the top, which is that fiber is a part of every single plant. There is no plant that is devoid of fiber, and plants have a monopoly. And fiber in the plant helps to give it its structure. But what happens in our body when we eat foods that contain fiber is, I think, a pretty radical, beautiful thing. It's not just in the mouth and then launching out the other end like a torpedo. Okay, that's what we've been told, and that's not true. That's a bold-faced lie. Okay, what happens is when you consume fiber, it passes through your stomach, your small intestine, which is 15 feet long, and it arrives to your colon unchanged. There's different types of fiber, which we can elaborate on more if you like. Some types of fiber are what we call prebiotic, which is what we were just talking about.
So they're food for the bacteria in your intestine.
They're food for the bacteria in the intestine, and so they are one of the few things that gets all the way through the small intestine and arrives in the large intestine unchanged. And your bacteria that live in the colon, in the large intestine, get into an absolute feeding frenzy. And they go nuts and they consume it. And it makes them stronger. And as a result of getting stronger, they multiply and they grow. We're talking about the anti-inflammatory microbes, the ones that you do want. They're multiplying, they're growing. And then what they do is they pay you the favor back. Thank you for feeding us. Let me nourish your body with this healing molecule, the short chain fatty acids. Butyrate, acetate, propionate. Those are the three names. I call them short chain fatty acids so that we can just keep them all into one bundle. And those things are incredibly powerful from a healing perspective.
They even, you say, are cancer fighting.
They are cancer fighting in a very fascinating way. Let me nerd out and be a scientist for a moment. I can't help myself. I have to go here. So for cancer to occur, what do we need? We need cells to multiply. Mm-hmm. We need cells to be basically just keep copying themselves. And in that process of making copies of itself, you need something called a histone deacetylase. Okay. And people who have been through medical school, they have a vision in their head of what this looks like. It's like a ball with a piece of string wrapped around it. If you can block the histone deacetylase, you can block the cell from copying itself. Guess what blocks the histone deacetylase? Butyrate, short chain fatty acids. And this is the reason why in the study that came out in January 2019 by Dr. Reynolds, Andrew Reynolds, in that study, the rate of colon cancer was dramatically reduced with the consumption of dietary fiber. So was the rate of breast cancer too, by the way. And this is the reason why it works.
So fiber is more than just getting us to go to the bathroom. Fiber also, from what you're saying, contributes to the explosion of good bacteria in our colon, which in turn then produce short chain fatty acids, which help our body in a myriad of ways, and our brains, by the way, go through, improve our health and our strength.
I totally agree. Yes, that is exactly what's happening. And let me just give you a quick example. Let's talk about a person who has a damaged gut. These are my patients. Mm-hmm. This is what I do for a living all day, every day. I was doing it today. And the person who has a damaged gut, you'll see people use the term on the internet, leaky gut. Mm-hmm. All right, I don't really love that term. Instead, I would use the term dysbiosis, dysbiosis, dysbiosis. What is that? What is dysbiosis? This is what I'm talking about in the person who has digestive issues. This is also what is associated with immune-mediated issues, allergic conditions like asthma, or autoimmune diseases like celiac, Crohn's, rheumatoid arthritis, MS. This is also associated with hormonal issues, PCOS, endometriosis. associated with brain issues. So Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, depression, anxiety. Dysbiosis has far-reaching health consequences, far beyond the gut. But everyone who has gut issues has dysbiosis.
And what is that? It sounds like it's an imbalance, but
it is. An imbalance is probably the right word to use. It's a loss of the good bacteria, an increase of the bad bacteria. Sometimes there is a loss of diversity of the different varieties or species of microbes that you have in your gut. And when this happens, when you lose the good guys and you get more bad guys, what you see is that the tight junctions, which are basically spot welds that hold the cells in the colon together, they break down and they open up. And now you have what we call increased intestinal permeability, which is okay if you want to call that leaky gut. That's what happens. And what leaks into the bloodstream is bacterial endotoxin, which causes inflammation throughout the entire body.
Right. And then is like the host for so many of those, not only diseases, but autoimmune diseases, situations that are happening in our body. Is that right?
Yes. Okay. Yes, 100%. I mean, if you want to talk about all of these different conditions, this is potentially the driving factor that we're talking about here. So the point from my perspective is these short chain fatty acids, when we're talking about dysbiosis connected to all these different things, we want to reverse this, right? And the way that we do this is right here, what we're talking about. Because when you consume fiber, you are getting more good guys. You're getting short chain fatty acids. The short chain fatty acids directly suppress the bad guys. So you are restoring that balance to the microbiome. And at the same time, the short chain fatty acids repair the tight junctions. When you restore that balance and repair the tight junctions, you don't have the release of bacterial endotoxin anymore. You just reverse the leaky gut.
I know people who have these diseases of the intestine like Crohn's, where there's a lot of inflammation, or IBS, IBD, these sort of general discomfort in this area and inflammation. And they actually avoid fiber. And doctors used to definitely say, because I had a friend who had a very serious inflammation in her colon. She was told not to eat vegetables at all.
Right.
And now I think that's changed. Now, your book says that you need to eat these things to improve the gut. Explain where the truth. Give us the truth.
You just threw me an alley-oop, and I'm so grateful for that right now. Thank you for that. All right, because people need to hear this. So first, what is inflammatory bowel disease? It is overactivation of your own immune system. But believe it or not, this is kind of weird. It's not autoimmune. It is not attacking your body. You know what it's attacking? Your microbiome. Your immune system is attacking your microbiome, which is the reason why they've never found an antibody that proves that people have Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, the two types of inflammatory bowel disease, because it's not autoimmune. It's attacking the microbiome. All right. And so if you believe that the microbiome is relevant to inflammatory bowel disease, which I think every gastroenterologist in America would agree on that statement, how can you deny that diet has anything to do with it when your microbiome is formed by your diet? And so I will tell you that a few years ago, I was the same guy. You need to cut your fiber. All right. Here's where I am today. This is what people need to do. You need to get your disease into remission. For most people, diet by itself is not going to get you there right off the bat. You need medications. If you have a fire, if you have a forest that is burning, you don't start repairing the forest before you put the fire out. You put the fire out, you repair the forest, and you get that beautiful forest back. And that's what I want my patients to do. We get them into remission. That means that there is not disease activity. You could check them top to bottom. You would not find any active inflammation.
How do you do that? And then how do you repair? What are the differences between those prescriptions?
Well, the difference between those prescriptions is there is a stepwise approach that is extremely complicated and nuanced in our field. I mean, I'm going to tell you that's one of the most complicated things that I have to deal with as a gastroenterologist.
Well, is the first step usually drugs, and the second step? Okay, so the first step is drugs for those who are have a lot of damage, and the second step is what? How do we get that back to balance, or to the people who just have a little bit of discomfort or inflammation or some diarrhea every so often? What are the recommendations for the healthiest gut that you can get
to get them back in a homeostasis?
Yeah. So whether we are talking about the person with inflammatory bowel disease with a rip-roaring flare, or talking about the person who has, gas bloating after a meal, these are just different levels of severity of the same process, which is damage to the gut, which we just defined. It's dysbiosis. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to repair dysbiosis. Now, I already said, step one, inflammatory bowel, put the fire out. You need medication to do that. But step two, when we pick up on diet, which is when I start to implement my diet, is the same regardless of who the person is. Mm. And we follow core tenets, okay? There are core tenets that are quite simple that can transform your health. There was a study, it's called the American Gut Project. It is by far the largest study to date to make a connection between our diet and our lifestyle and the health of our microbiome. These are not doctors with an agenda. These are scientists who could win a Nobel Prize. And when they analyzed the American Gut Project for the first time and published the results, there was one specific characteristic above all else, the number one predictor of a healthy gut microbiome. And that was the diversity of plants in your diet. It is not about grams of fiber. It is not about, honestly, being vegan. This was more powerful than being vegan, because you could be a junk food vegan. This is about diversity of plants in the diet. And it makes so much sense. Here's why. Every single plant has its own unique mix of fiber. Mm. We don't even know how many types of fiber exist. There's not even an estimate. And so every plant has its own types of fiber, which feeds its own little populations of microbes. So when you have a wide mix of different types of plants, all the healthy microbes get fed. But when you cut out categories, whichever microbes thrived on that category, they're not being fed, which means that they're starving, which means that they are failing and they fall apart.
So you recommend, I think it's at least 30 different plant foods every week. And so that diversity gives you a diverse microbiome, and diversity in microbiome also means a healthy person. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Right. So if we go back to our definition of dysbiosis, a person who has dysbiosis has loss of diversity. Mm. These conditions that we're talking about associated with dysbiosis, whether it be inflammatory bowel, digestive issues, autoimmune issues, neurologic issues, whatever it may be, they're all associated with a loss of diversity in the gut. Mm. Obesity, type 2 diabetes, loss of diversity.
So loss of diversity and also too many bad guys.
Well, that's the loss of diversity comes with the too many bad guys. So you lose the balance at the same time. It all happens as one big package. Mm-hmm. Oh. Okay. But when they study these patients, they uniformly find that there's a loss of diversity. Diversity, just to kind of point this out for a moment, I think this is very important to understand. Biodiversity is a fascinating topic. Let's zoom out for a moment, stop talking about our gut, and let's look at biodiversity in any ecosystem. The health of the Amazon rainforest is dependent on biodiversity. When animal species go extinct, that rainforest becomes less healthy, more volatile. I don't like mosquitoes. I also don't want to see mosquitoes go extinct, because that would cause harm to the ecosystems in which they currently live. Our gut is as much of an ecosystem as the rainforest. And the loss of diversity causes instability, which can lead to disease. So we want to restore maximum diversity to our gut. The way that we do that is with dietary diversity of plants. And there is no hard cutoff. The number 30, to be fair, is what was in the study. But if you look at the statistics, it's not about the number 30. It could have been a continuous number.
Sure.
It was just a way that they did the analysis. You're better with 35 than you are with 30.
How many do you get, Dr. B? I'm wondering if you ever count it, because I think I'm going to count this week. Dotsie, I think you should count. You're going to get like 100.
I don't know.
Dotsie will get 100.
I'm going to count.
Dr. B, have you counted?
I had one day where I had a competition against an influencer on Instagram, and I counted, and I had, I believe, 43 between breakfast and lunch. Now I was going hard. I was going hard, but
it still shows it's possible. So some people think there aren't even 43 options in the vegan world, but there are.
Yeah.
Well, and that's actually a great point, because actually, if you look, most Americans are certainly less than 50 total. Even people who are trying are less than 50 total.
You mean 50 in their whole life? Basically, they eat the same 50 foods. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I think 50 in their whole life is where most Americans are right now. Not even in a given calendar year. And if you look at, we were talking before about the tribal people. All right, now the tribal people have 40% more diversity than we do in the United States. So by all measures, they have a much healthier microbiome. And it's not just grams of fiber. Yes, they eat more than 100 grams of fiber. They also, the estimate is 600 varieties of plants.
Wow. I don't eat a lot of diversity. I need to work on that. I'm very much as you know, Dotsie,
everybody
a creature
is.
of habit.
Everybody is, you know.
Have the same, a lot of people have the same breakfast, and then they'll vary a little bit their lunch and dinner, but they'll
right.
Yeah.
It makes sense in my mind anyway. The biodiversity conversation and the gut connection to biodiversity when it comes to organs like my heart being healthy, my lungs being healthy, my kidney, my liver. But one of the biggest topics that I think is just scratching the surface is the connection between our brain and our gut, and understanding how much of our serotonin, for example, is created or starts in the gut. Please share your knowledge in terms of the brain and gut connection. I think now more than ever we need it. People are feeling really anxious. And I know probably, I would say, over 50% of the people that I know somewhat intimately are on some kind of serotonin uptake. I mean, they're on drugs to be happy.
Yeah.
And it's scary, right?
Yeah.
Because we know some information and some research about those drugs that you once you start them, you're hard pressed to go off of them, or it's going to be real doomsday in your life. That's what I mean by scary.
So can we affect depression by what we eat, and therefore what does our microbiome say about our mood?
We can 100% affect depression and anxiety through our microbiome.
And how do we do that? For those who are depressed out there who go, oh my God, Dotsie, what'd she just say? What would you say, Dr. B, for what should they eat? Is there a specific food they need to eat to get the specific microbiome for depression? Or are you just saying just eat a wide variety of plants and that will help your mood?
Going back to what you were saying, Dotsie, about a person who goes on these meds and then struggles to come off of them. Well, if the gut and the brain are connected to each other, and you go on those meds, and you don't change your diet, and you don't change your lifestyle, your gut's not going to change. How would you ever expect to be able to come off of those meds? You wouldn't, because the root of the problem, or a big part of why you're feeling the way that you are, has not been fixed. And so from my perspective, I guess let me start with a brief explanation of the brain-gut connection, which is that you can't separate the brain from the gut. They're completely intertwined. And part of the way that they're intertwined are nerves. We have 500 million nerves in our gut, carpeting it from the mouth to the bottom. 500 million. You know how many there are in the spinal cord? 100 million. We have 5 times more in our gut than we do in our spinal cord. The brain has more. Okay, we'll give brain credit for that. You got us there. There's a huge connection between the brain and the gut. It's like a major telephone line. It's called the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is what's carrying that information from the 500 million nerves that's going by a fraction of a second up to the brain to be interpreted. And the brain sends information back down. Okay. And looking at the neurotransmitters, you alluded to this a little bit, Dotsie. Serotonin. Serotonin's the happy hormone. If we take Zoloft, Paxil, these are drugs that are called serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They boost serotonin to improve anxiety and depression. 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut. Only 10% is produced in the brain. 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut. 50% of dopamine, the reward center, dopamine controls when we crave something. 50% of dopamine produced in the gut. There are over 30 neurotransmitters produced in the gut. The gut communicates to the brain through more than just the vagus nerve. It connects through these neurotransmitters. There are serotonin precursors that cross the blood-brain barrier. And short-chain fatty acids cross the blood-brain barrier and have healing effects in the brain as well. If we want optimal brain function, we need optimal gut health. Mm-hmm. And so the concepts remain the same. So Alexandra, to answer your question, what would I recommend to that patient who has anxiety or depression? Here's what I would recommend. Read my book. Read Fiber Fueled. Fiber Fueled lays out for you the path to optimizing your gut, whether you are healthy or whether you are sick. The path and the concepts remain the same. It's the same stuff that I personally do. And you do this, we have a 4-week plan with over 70 recipes. If you follow the plan, it's meant to jumpstart you on this journey towards better gut health. And when you get better gut health, all these other organs fall in line behind it, because even though we tend to favor the brain in terms of importance, the gut is where all health starts.
And are there...
Go ahead. I'll ask.
Are there certain... let's just say we have digestive problems as opposed to mood problems. Are there different foods you would recommend for different presenting issues?
Not really. Not really. Like so with regard to, if you're talking about neurologic issues or neuropsychiatric issues like anxiety, depression, or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, what I guess let me say this real quick. Parkinson's disease. I'll give you an example. Parkinson's disease. Extremely common for them to have constipation. Again, brain gut. It's all intertwined. Extremely common. Not diarrhea. Always constipation. What do I do in that patient? Do I just start ramping up the fiber, start ramping up the plant-based diversity? No. I get them pooping. And so I want to get them into a rhythm. And when I have them in that rhythm, then I want to introduce increased plant-based diversity, increased plants, in order to get them to where they need to be. Okay, so that's the way that I approach that specific issue. Whether it's a person with neurologic issues, person with digestive issues, or whatever it may be, if their gut is damaged, I have to be honest, that is the person who is going to struggle the most with plants. This is why we see vegans quitting on the internet. True healing of the gut is not through avoidance, it's through abundance, and it's with fiber, and it's bringing those things back on board.
I have a superstition that you're welcome to bust through, although I still may do it. I have this idea in my head that in order to get great, cognitive output, that I need whole food EFAs. And this started when I did my TED Talk and I ate 2 handfuls of almonds and coconut water right before and got those essential fatty acids from the nuts. And because I was just completely freaked out that I had to totally memorize a 15-minute TED Talk. And so, but I did it. It came out of my mouth. I had memorized it.
And you were great. So it
whatever
worked.
there, but I was able to spit it back out for 15 minutes. And so now between in front of every single speaking gig that I do, it's a couple handfuls of almonds and coconut water. Is there any connection there to whole food essential fatty acids? And I'm sure it's a combination of so many things like we're learning from you today, right? Diversity, not just the almonds, Dotsie. But is there some connection between essential fatty acids and good cognitive function, brain function?
Well, it's hard for me to really comment broadly, specifically to the nuts, because it's a little bit beyond my area of expertise in terms of what foods are best for brain function beyond what they do in the gut. But you're asking me, are essential fatty acids, can they affect brain function? And the answer, from my perspective, is that there is a huge, powerful amount of data that show that short-chain fatty acids do affect brain function. And not specifically with nuts, but in children with ADHD who have difficulty concentrating, attention deficit disorder, they have difficulty concentrating. They have shown in studies that by increasing short-chain fatty acids, they're actually able to improve concentration. They also have studies that show that it improves memory. So these ideas that you're talking about, it could be the essential fatty acids that are in the nut. It could also be that the fiber is feeding your microbiome to release short-chain fatty acids.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome.
What about people who want to lose weight or boost their metabolism? You have some tweaks in your book, and you can tell from someone's, actually, if you look at their stool, you can actually, can't scientists tell whether someone is fat or thin just from the makeup of their microbiome?
So our gut microbiome is deeply intertwined with our metabolism, just like it is so many of these other organ systems. And when you damage the gut and you have dysbiosis, you're going to throw your metabolism out of whack. And so they did a fascinating study where they took identical human twins. Okay, so they are genetically the same. And what they intentionally looked for were human twins that are discordant for weight. One is overweight, the other is thin. And they took the microbiome, a stool specimen, from these twins. They put one from the overweight twin into a mouse. They put one from the skinny twin into a different mouse. They then fed the mice the exact same diet. So again, these mice have human microbiome. One from an obese person and the other mouse has one from a skinny person. They fed these mice the exact same diet, same number of calories. We've been told it's calories in, calories out. The mouse that received the obese microbiome became obese. The mouse that received the skinny microbiome became skinny. They were fed the same calories. Mm-hmm. It was the microbiome that did it.
Yeah, and I've heard that they've sometimes reversed it then, and then the mice lost weight after they got the skinny person.
That's
so
true.
Now there's going to be, Dotsie, there's going to be a market for your stool. And mine too.
And you can literally go do that. I had a conversation.
I totally believe that's going to be the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, and honestly, if I needed a stool transplant, I would accept no less.
Well, actually, yes, Dr.
Right?
Angie said that it was vegans that were the ones who when people got very sick from maybe C. diff, having too much C. diff, that bacteria, which can be deadly, it was plant-based stool that the doctors were looking for.
Yes.
Yeah, I know a
It's
few
true.
vegans who are making a good amount of money off of that, giving their stool. Yep.
Oh,
Yeah,
I was
and
joking.
I met them through Dr. Angie. Nope.
Oh, okay. Great.
Don't
Well,
know, we
folks,
should sign
this
up.
is another reason to go plant-based.
I know you could. So there's so much more we can dive into. So clearly, you're going to have to come back after the great success of the book and tell us more and more and more. But we don't want to not get in fermentation because it's definitely a bit part in your book. And I'm constantly asked the question. People that say they need their cultured dairy yogurt, right? They need the probiotics in their dairy yogurt. And that's why they're still leaning into them. Like there's probiotics other places, but they're just very connected to that. So first of all, what are healthy fermented foods? And then why would you tell people to lean away from dairy yogurt? Because I'm assuming that you do, knowing you and reading part of your book. What would be the detriment of, even though there's some probiotics, mixing it with dairy?
So, I think that the first answer is to say, what's the value of fermented food? Mm-hmm. And every single culture in human history naturally came to have fermented food as a celebrated part of their food tradition. And part of it, which I talk about in the book, is it's quite fascinating to consider this. As we were growing, we were tribes, right? And we want to turn the tribe into a city. And we want to build a society. But we have a problem. We can't preserve our food. So what do? And so they remained hunters and gatherers until they got to a point where they could actually preserve their food. Fermentation is what actually did that. It allowed them to keep their food. Like, you harvest all the cabbage in October and you still got cabbage into March. Fantastic. You got sauerkraut. So now I love fermented foods. I think that the flavor is vibrant and electric. It's different than anything else that we eat. So for the palate, it's a beautiful thing. For the gut, it's also a beautiful thing. They actually change the fiber. So you have new types of fiber. I'm telling you, different types of fiber is critically important. You're getting new types of fiber. You have bacteria that are alive, that are a part of the food, probiotics. And in many cases, they will unlock parts of the food that we don't previously have access to. For example, in our cruciferous vegetables, they will actually activate the glucosinolates, which are the cancer-fighting compounds. They will turn them on so that they're ready to go, fight cancer. Until they get turned on, they don't do anything for us. So this is the beauty of fermented foods. What kind of fermented foods do I like? I don't think this comes as a surprise. I love fermented plants. And I make them myself. And I talk about them in detail the way I got started on this. Okay, but my favorite, I love cabbage-based ones. Mm-hmm. I love sauerkraut. It's so radically different than the type of sauerkraut that came out of a can when I was a kid. It's crunchy, it's vibrant, it's delicious. My wife and I are obsessed with it. I can't make enough to keep up with the amount that my wife eats. Okay? So
can I buy it too? And because everyone's thinking that, especially me, if I'm not ready to make it yet, I can buy it easily, right?
Yeah, you can find I know Trader Joe's has their version. Whole Foods definitely has their version. Okay. So it tends to be that kind of market. In terms of the individual supermarkets, they're hit or miss many times. So, okay, so I love those foods. I like kombucha. I think kombucha is a little bit hyped up. People are overdoing it. You don't need that much, and it's not a gut health game changer. Okay, so pump the brakes a little bit on kombucha. I'd rather you have sauerkraut a little bit.
And some diversity. Have a little kombucha, a little sauerkraut, a little something else.
You're exactly right, Alexandra. Diversity of fermented food.
She can work for you. Good job.
Yeah. You caught the message. That's the golden rule. The golden rule is diversity of plants, including fermented.
Yeah.
All right. Now, when we talk about yogurt and we talk about, fermented dairy, like kefir, for example, the way that I see it is this. Number one, the vast majority of fermented dairy that's out there is trash. All right. It's the same dairy. And then they inject probiotics into it at the end. And it's loaded up with sugar. There's no value to that. Don't waste your time. All right. Number two, the stuff that actually is fermented, which is a small minority, the way that I see it is this. That has saturated fat. Saturated fat in studies very clearly causes damage to the gut microbiome. It induces dysbiosis. Saturated fat induces dysbiosis. Why would you reach for that when you could reach for a tub of sauerkraut? Mm-hmm. There's no point to making that choice. Nutrition is all about substitutions. What are you replacing with what? Could you make that, like, hypothetically more healthy than something else that you're eating? Yes, but you could do that with virtually any food that's not that great for you. The data that exists to support the consumption of fermented dairy is either number one, very small studies, number two, limited to short term, or most importantly, number three, it's completely industry funded.
Yeah, and what they're controlled against.
So what we have seen is that, and you know what? I doubt this has ever happened on your show before, and don't hold this against me for doing this. I have to give credit to the dairy industry. They were ahead of the curve in weaponizing research against us. Mm-hmm. They were ahead of the curve. Mm-hmm. They basically started to do something 40 years ago that everyone else is doing now because they saw how well it worked for them. They weaponized the research, they funded the studies, they shared it if the results looked good, they threw it out if the results didn't look good. And now here we are, and we're saturated with these studies that are from them. And you got to read the fine print to know whether or not they're the ones who are funding it.
And now there's Switch4Good battling them at every step. So watch out, dairy industry. You're not going to get away with it anymore.
Taking them on. I love it.
Dr. B, thank you so much for being on the show. And we are so happy to be able to publicize your book, Fiber Fueled. And fiber is fire.
Fiber is fire. I love it.
And so thank you. So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the Switch for Good, please visit us at switch4good.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to Switch4Good. This is the future.